और अब आपको सीधे ले चलते हैं सेबी की प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस में।
To run a business, they are meant to also provide, in effect, public infrastructure. So the exchanges, the clearing corporations, the depositories, the systems that they run are not proprietary in the sense of there being just like any other systems of any other private organization. They are in the nature of public infrastructure because these entities have a lot of regulatory protection. So given that they have a lot of regulatory protection, they are expected to run their systems in the form and manner of it being a public infrastructure and not just their own proprietary systems. The third area of their operations is really to act as a first level regulator. So they not only need to be very careful about their own compliances with the regulations, but also to look at the compliances by the registered brokers, by the registered DPs, by the listed entities. And it was the committee's finding that perhaps these three different roles that the MIIs have were not getting adequate and equal importance. So a lot of what you are seeing as the manifestation of the working committee's report is that each of these three pillars of the role of the MIIs to function as a profitable, viable commercial entity, plus provide public infrastructure, plus function as a effective first level regulator, all these three things need to be delivered. So that is really the central thought, and it is reflected in almost everything that you see here, whether it is the proposed structure of MIIs, the nature of board governance, the accountability of the KMPs, the code of conduct, and this is, an important piece. You would have noticed on page 3, item number 12, that board members and KMPs will be held accountable if they are aware of wrongdoings but have not appropriately reported the same. Because you're not just another entity, you're a market infrastructure institution, and if you become aware and you do not report, then you are complicit. So this is a very important part of governance and code of conduct. And overall, therefore, the objective is that this should bring in much more balanced operations of the MIIs with a lot of transparency and accountability. We then move on to item number 2, which is the buyback of securities. I think that has already attracted a lot of interest. I think somebody in the media reported that SEBI has picked out its favorite mode, and which is true, because we feel that the tender route is the more equitable route to buyback, and that the other routes are vulnerable to favoritism, let me say, because nobody really knows that in the exchange mechanism, when is the company going to come in order to buy back the shares, and only a few people may be aware of it, and benefits may flow to those few people. It is not an equitable mechanism. And in that context, we are therefore seeking to phase out the stock exchange route for buyback. But in the interim, since we don't want to have any knee-jerk reaction to anything, and we have given a glide path, in the interim, we propose that there will be that minimum utilization of the earmarked amount should be increased from 50% to 75%, which means that if you announce a buyback, you must at least do 75% buyback. And also that there will be a separate window on the stock exchange. It cannot be nebulous, and it matches with just anybody. There is a separate window for buyback. And that will also assist going forward in terms of identifying the tax-related issues, which are important in the whole buyback mechanism. The tender offer route, we are trying to optimize by reducing the timeline, and you will notice that one of the things that we have done, in SEBI, we've spoken about ease of doing business, of business process re-engineering, and you would have noticed on page 4 that we are completely removing the requirement of filing a draft letter of offer with SEBI and awaiting our observations. It's just eliminated. So we believe that this is a already listed entity. It has ongoing disclosure requirements. They are making public their intentions, and there is no need for SEBI to have any additional requirements or to make any additional observations, and people are expected to comply with the laws of the land. So removing altogether the requirement of filing and observations, which saves time, and also cutting short the tendering period and the period requirement for payment. We have now all digital payment mechanisms, so there's no reason for it to take so long. We are also permitting upward revision of the buyback price right up till 1 day prior to the record date. Right? And why the record date? Because naturally, if somebody is taking a decision on the basis of the buyback price, then he needs to know that before the record date is recorded and the cutoff is made. There's also some mandatory dissemination of information that is in line with our usual philosophy of disclosure and transparency. And overall, we hope that this will really streamline the buyback process, also create a level playing field for all investors once the stock exchange route is phased out. The third is a very important piece of regulation. It is facilitative in nature. In the mutual fund industry, as you know, that right now all the online platforms are either registered as brokers or investment advisors, and they need to comply with a very large set of regulations which were never really designed or intended for somebody who is offering merely an execution platform for direct plans of mutual funds. So therefore, the thought is that we will create this new category. And in this new category, people will then be free to be able to offer this facility, which has anyway become very popular amongst investors, to go online and to directly invest in direct schemes and direct plans of mutual funds. But the offerer need not comply with a whole host of either broker regulations or investment advisor regulations. They comply only with the specific regulations related to execution-only platforms. So hopefully this will make it a lot easier for people to offer this while complying in a very convenient way. Of course, also we have brought in the whole concept of investor protection into this whole framework. Essentially, the advisory committees on this subject and the consultation papers, there were two models which were proposed. We finally decided that we as a regulator don't need to pick favorites on this one. We are okay. The first model, which is called Category 1, is where the platform operates as an agent of the AMC. So he gets paid by the AMC, he has a contract with the AMC, and he's functioning as an arm of the AMC, registered with AMFI, because the AMFI is the sort of a trade body for the AMCs. So they will not register with SEBI at all. They will be treated as agents of the AMCs, and whatever regulation we need to do will be via the AMCs. The second model is Cat 2, where the execution-only platform is an agent of the investor. And then he has to be registered as a stockbroker, but this will be a limited purpose stockbroker so that he doesn't have to comply with needless regulations. And here they will be registered with SEBI. SEBI will give the registration and the investor will pay because he's an agent of the investor. So both models will be available and people will be free to pick whatever works for them. The next item is very, very critical, I think, to us in SEBI. While we celebrate technology and all that it can do to democratize access to the markets, we also worry about cybersecurity. We also worry about disruption of trading services, not every time because of cyber attacks, but simply because when businesses grow very large and the technology begins to become a little dated, it doesn't always hold up under pressure. And we worry that particularly where this risk is concentrated in terms of some of the large brokers today that we have, then the investor is left with no alternative. If his broker is down and his position is open and the market is volatile, he is very, very vulnerable. So the objective here is to provide a mechanism for such investors to come directly to the exchange, to close out their positions and to close their and to cancel their orders. So this direct access will be facilitated only for risk reduction. They cannot increase positions while their broker is down. But if the broker is down for a certain period and there is a mechanism that has been described, then this alternative mechanism comes up and people are free to come, access their positions in the market, close them out, close their pending orders so that risk is reduced. So it's a risk reduction access to investors, and this can be triggered either at the request of the broker himself, because if he goes down and he sees that it's unlikely he's going to be able to come up soon, he can request the exchanges to trigger this. Or even if the broker does not request, but suo moto the exchanges feel that this has been taking too long, the broker is not able to come up, it's a volatile day, then they can automatically, or they can suo moto trigger this facility and let the investors know that they have an alternative option to come here and execute their risk reduction trades. This would be a first across the globe. It's a very, very important initiative from our perspective. It will require building of systems and execution. So we expect that roughly in the third quarter of 23-24 is when this will go live. But all the planning and the working and the building will happen in the interim. Next item is a sort of linked item in the sense that it talks about stockbrokers who will henceforth be designated as qualified stockbrokers. You're probably aware that 3 of our RTAs, that is registrar and transfer agents, are called qualified RTAs because they handle very, very large volumes of investor data and transactions. And they have certain additional requirements which they have to comply with over and above what regular RTAs have to comply with. So similarly over here, in order to address the concentration risk which exists in our market today, there are, as you know, for instance, the top 10 or top 12 brokers will account for very, very large percentage of the market volumes. So in order to mitigate the concentration risk, what is proposed is that on the basis of some very transparent criteria, first of all, certain brokers will be identified or designated as qualified stockbrokers, and there will be an enhanced requirement on them in terms of risk management, of course, all types of risk, market risk, IT risk, cyber risk, etc. Much higher standards will be expected of them. And there will be a higher obligation on the MIIs and on SEBI in terms of monitoring them as well. So for instance, in terms of our inspections, etc., frequency of inspection, regularity of review, etc., all of that, there will be a greater responsibility on the MIIs and on SEBI as well. The next item is relating to FPIs. As you know, we had a few months ago constituted a dedicated standing committee for FPIs to be able to focus on their requirements. They are an important stakeholder in our markets. And one of the first things that they wished us to take up was to have an easier onboarding process and a registration process. And based on the recommendations of the working group that was constituted under the aegis of that committee, a number of recommendations have come, including processing of papers based on scanned copies, digital signatures, SWIFT mechanism to get confirmations from overseas bankers, and so on. Certain risk mitigation measures are also in place, so it's not as though only scanned copies will be used. The plan is really because they need a number of registrations and accounts to be opened. So what happens is that it all becomes sequential and everything has to wait for the next thing. Whereas the plan here is that once you are relying on scanned documents, you can do a lot of things in parallel. But the final activation of the accounts will only happen when the physical documents come. But still, in the meanwhile, you've been able to do many more things in parallel. So this is expected to bring down the time required for FPI registration and also to facilitate making it more easy. The next one is in respect of green bonds. As you know, this is going to become a very key area of finance for all countries. And it is very important that we facilitate finance of green initiatives while safeguarding against greenwashing.
तो आप सुन रहे हैं सेबी की महत्वपूर्ण प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस जिसमें बायबैक नियमों में बदलाव किया गया है।